Well, this is a little bit of a deja vu. That's right, you've probably seen this intro before, you've seen the thumbnail, the title, probably gonna be different. But we are back this time to discuss the Square Enix financial progress report because now I am armed with information that I was not privy to when I made the previous video, and I'd like to make some corrections, which you will see in the latter half of this video. So with that, I bring you guys the Square Enix financial progress report overview, remake, integrate, edition, intro, bang, special effects, music, you get the idea. All right, let's go ahead and start off with that Square Enix financial progress report, which focuses primarily on their earnings for the year of 2025, but they also do look beyond and what we can expect there. Now, you might be wondering, hold on a second. These are 2025 earnings. Why are they talking about them in 2026? Well, based on what I could find online, in Japan, a lot of these big corporations are required to submit their tax accounting info by May 31st. So a company like Square Enix will usually structure out their quarters to end on March 31st of the following year. So their 2025 fiscal year, for example, stretches into 2026, ending on that March 31st date. It's a little confusing, but I bring that up because it actually is incredibly important to the big topic of discussion that we'll get to eventually, and that's the release window for VII Remake Part 3. But moving on, how is Square Enix doing? Well, actually, they're doing pretty good. Their profits are up despite the fact that game sales are down, and that's primarily because last year they didn't really have a ton of big releases. They did have things like Final Fantasy Tactics, the Ivalice Chronicles, which sold pretty good. I believe it sold 1 million copies in the course of 3 months, and some of the developers were expecting 1 million copies in 3 years. So word of mouth, good quality game. Did very well. They also had Dragon Quest VII Reimagined. I don't know the financials on that, but I do know that critically it was very well received. But they are forecasting a much bigger return for 2026, and that's because they will have things like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth going multi-platform for Switch 2 and Xbox, and also the really big Final Fantasy XIV expansion, which is set to release in January of 2027, and I believe that is called Evercold. So those are going to be two of their bigger games moving forward. That's what they're really focused on for the fiscal year of 2026. Now, an area where Square Enix is doing very well, that's in merchandising and all that cross-media initiative stuff. So like the Magic the Gathering crossover that they did with Final Fantasy, which did gangbusters. I have a few cards myself. The first time I ever purchased any Magic the Gathering stuff is because of Final Fantasy. That did very well when it came out, and to my understanding, I think it is still selling pretty consistently even into this year of 2026. And the whole cross-media initiatives includes like trading card stuff, comic books, music albums, tours, tabletop games, books. And Square Enix has been very strong in that category for quite some time now, and it just kind of seems to be getting bigger and bigger every single year. So, moving into the future, I could see collaborations with like Fortnite maybe happening. That'd be pretty cool. I really, really want Tifa in a fighting game. That's a completely different scenario, but I expect in the future they'll have bigger cross promotions that probably do just as well. So being able to diversify your IP is a pretty big skill, and that's not something that everyone has. Even Capcom isn't exactly great at diversifying their IP like Square Enix is. They also did acknowledge the really big elephant in the room in regard to how long it takes to release their games, and they are actively working to create a framework that would enable regular new title releases, with their main focus being on their bigger IPs like Dragon Quest and the Final Fantasy franchise. And that's going to take about 3 years to fully integrate into the company and get that plan rolling, which is nice. It was just a few years ago where they talked about, we want to try and find a way to get our releases out consistently, really focus on quality over quantity. Now, a few years later, it seems like they have a plan that they can actually integrate into the company that will hopefully help them moving into the future and have these games be on a much more consistent release schedule, which, if done right, could really help out Square Enix in the long run and really get franchises like Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest out there consistently, which in theory should help younger people and even older people kind of form more of a connection with these games because they'll be seeing them on a consistent basis. That's something that Capcom is doing gangbusters at. Many years ago, they restructured their company, and their big focus was their tentpole titles: Resident Evil, Street Fighter, Monster Hunter, focusing on those games, making sure that it was a quality over quantity scenario, getting these games out like every 2.5 to 3 years. And the success of those games allowed Capcom to then make smaller, weirder titles, which not all of them paid off. If anyone remembers Exoprimal, interesting idea. I personally really wanted Dino Crisis, but that game came out. It wasn't by any means bad, but it didn't really kind of light things up, I think, the way Capcom was hoping. But on the flip side of that, you have a situation like Pragmata, which came out. It's a brand new IP. It's an incredible game, potentially my game of the year. We still have Onimusha coming out later, so that's to be determined. But Pragmata being a new IP and being so well received, it's now sold over 2 million units since its release. So sometimes you get really lucky, and when those bigger tentpole games find success, that brings more money into the company, which allows developers a little bit more freedom to create new games, weirder games, focus on launching new IPs, and sometimes it works very well like a Pragmata, which I hope to see happen for Square Enix in the future. You know, get Final Fantasy consistently out there. Maybe you can experiment with new IPs or reworking some of the older Final Fantasy titles into smaller scale remakes or even like a demake. There's a lot of possibilities there, but you know, it all depends on how this stuff shakes out. All right, this is where the video changes. This is where the new stuff comes in. And I want to first off make a correction on a statement that I made in the previous video that I got wrong. So when we were looking at the fiscal year 27 forecast for Square Enix, we noticed, oh, Rebirth's there and Evercold is there. There's no Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3 there. Guess the game's probably not coming out before April. There's no way these forecasts will ever change, even if there was a fire. Turns out, that's not true. I got it wrong.
It's fiction. We made up this one. We made it up. Not this time. Wrong. Not this time. Not this time. You're wrong. Not this time. It never happened.
And all of this was brought to my attention by a wonderful viewer by the name of Mellow Moonlight, who went the extra mile and did a ton of digging and even brought me the sources for this information to let me know actually, Square Enix can leave off unannounced games off of their forecast. And they sourced all of this information from the Financial Services Agency in Japan, as well as the Japan Exchange Group, two big groups in Japan that handle a lot of the finances, banking, securities, insurance, all that stuff. So it's from a legit source. So essentially what can go on here is that, yeah, technically Remake Part 3 could release before April. Square Enix just doesn't have to publicly disclose that on their forecast. Now, they do have to disclose things privately, obviously within the company, and when it comes to things like investors. And to do so, they do have to have a proper, accurate forecast that would include the revenue that that unannounced project would bring in. And they also provided a really good example of this using Capcom. Now, granted, it's Capcom, different company, they operate differently. But when they were doing their fiscal year 2026 forecast, nowhere in that forecast was Resident Evil Requiem. Why? It wasn't ready to be announced and marketed just yet. But sure enough, within that same fiscal year, the game was announced and released, and all of Capcom's numbers were correct. So they followed the right procedures and had the accurate forecasts that would have included Requiem. They just didn't reveal it at the time to the public. They also point out, and this one, obviously take it with a grain of salt. Mellow Moonlight also tells me, like this is just, guesstimation in the DMs. The forecast that Square Enix has listed for their next fiscal year is pretty close to the report that they had last year. And last year is when they had some pretty big numbers with that Magic the Gathering crossover, which did gangbusters. Dawn Trail, the Final Fantasy XIV expansion, also brought in a lot of numbers. And they point out that the Magic the Gathering stuff has slowed down a bit, so it would be kind of odd to have like such a big or close number that was very similar to the last fiscal year, only relying on Rebirth going to Switch 2 and the Evercold expansion. So, there's some wiggle room there for maybe a Remake Part 3. But again, take that with a grain of salt. That's just, theorizing and speculating based on some of the numbers that are out there. But don't take that as fact. So, long story short, Square Enix, other companies like Capcom, can withhold the name of unannounced games on their forecasts as long as they report the proper estimated revenue to the people that really matter within the companies, and then at a later date, they can still announce and release said game within that same fiscal year should they choose to. So I just wanted to clarify that statement I made in the previous video, correct it. I don't want to have any, wrong or misleading information flying out there. And also a huge thanks to Mellow Moonlight, who goes by Mike, for bringing all of this to my attention and being nice enough to leave a comment on the previous video and then providing me with all of the necessary sources and the numbers. And they are clearly very well versed with this stuff, way more than I am. So what about the rest of the video? It's kind of pointless because my original topic of the video was, oh, it looks like the game's not coming out before April. Now, aspects of what I talked about are still relevant, I would say, in terms of like, yeah, you can still announce the game at Summer Game Fest. And now with this information, it could still release within this fiscal year, meaning before April of 2027. Or it could not. There's a lot going on at Square Enix with the restructuring. Even Naoki Hamaguchi has talked about in previous interviews when asked about multi-platform stuff. He's basically like, yeah, we're still trying to figure out what to do. So Square Enix themselves may not even know if this is going to be a multi-platform day one release or if it's just going to be on PS5. And of course, there's all of the restructuring stuff that's just now really kicking in, I believe, at Square Enix. So there's a lot of factors going into this. So essentially, the main point of the end of my video is we're in a situation where we know nothing. So it could come out before April. It might not. But I just wanted to make some clarifications and get the proper information out there as to not mislead anyone or put out wrong information. I care about that stuff. Yes, it's YouTube, but we're having fun making silly videos, but I want to make sure the real info actually gets out there. So hopefully I got everything right. Mellow Moonlight Mike, if you watch this video, correct me in the comments if there was something that I left out or messed up on. It's bound to happen. But the more I learn about this stuff, the more intriguing it actually is. Knowing like some of the inner workings of like, oh, these are our forecasts, but we don't have to put everything on there. We just got to make sure we get that estimated revenue right. It's pretty interesting. So with that being said, that is the video. I am Curious Corduroy. Let me know what you guys thought in the comments down below. And to have a fun question for the end of this video, we all know there's probably going to be a deluxe edition or a collector's edition that comes with part 3. What do you think it's going to come with? What statue? We know we got Cloud for 7 Remake. I believe Rebirth came with Sephiroth. Who do you think is going to be the inevitable new statue for the 3rd game? Let me know in the comments down below. I will see you guys in the next video. Please remember to always be excellent to one another.